Today's video is super special because I'm doing the thing I promised, which is a book analysis video. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and for those new to my channel, hello, I'm Nour Zikra, author of Divinity Falling. If you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe for weekly writing advice videos. So a few weeks ago, I talked about doing a book analysis video, and today we're doing exactly that. Basically, I want to do these types of videos every couple of weeks or whenever I get a chance. And the reason I'm calling it a book analysis instead of a book review is because I'm not exactly reviewing the book. My intention isn't to tell you whether or not the book is worth reading. Instead, I just want to analyze the book from the perspective of a writer. What this means is that I'll dive into character development, conflict, and that kind of thing. So my plan is to look into specific scenes and passages and just analyze it from the perspective of a writer and share with you what I think of the author's style of writing. So in essence, we're diving into the craft of writing. Now, I'll still tell you whether I like the book or not, but generally, these videos are meant to analyze the craft, not the book. But keep in mind, if I don't like the book I'm reading, I probably won't do a book analysis on it because I'll probably be bored and not finish it. So if I do a book analysis, it means I most likely enjoyed it. So with that in mind, the book I'm analyzing today is These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. So I have my handy dandy notes here just because I don't want to go all over the place. Now, I will try my best not to give any major spoilers, or I will try to hide as much information as possible so that if you do want to read the book yourself, you won't be spoiled ahead of time. And before we dive into the book analysis, let me read the blurb of the book so that you get an idea of what it's about. The year is 1926 and Shanghai hums to the tune of debauchery. A blood feud between two gangs runs the streets red, leaving the city helpless in the grip of chaos. At the heart of it all is 18-year-old Juliet Kai, a former flapper who has returned to assume her role as the proud heir of the Scarlet Gang, a network of criminals far above the law. Their only rivals in power are the White Flowers, who have fought the Scarlets for generations. And behind every move is their heir, Roma Montagov, Juliet's first love and first betrayal. But when gangsters on both sides show signs of instability culminating in clawing their own throats out, the people start to whisper of a contagion, a madness, of a monster in the shadows. As the deaths stack up, Juliet and Roma must set their guns and grudges aside and work together, for if they can't stop this mayhem, then there will be no city left for either to rule. So to sum up, it's pretty much a Romeo and Juliet retelling. Except here, we're in Shanghai, Juliet is Chinese and belongs to the Scarlet Gang, and Romeo, who is known as Roma in this book, is Russian and belongs to the White Flowers gang. So essentially, they belong to two different gangs. So Roma and Juliet used to date a couple years back, but because of something Roma did to Juliet, they no longer speak. And Juliet went off to the United States, but now she's back, she's 18 years old, and things are about to go crazy. She hasn't seen Roma in a couple years since he betrayed her, but now there's this monster coming out of the Huangpu River, and it's destroying their world. Or more specifically, they think the monster is targeting people from both their gangs. Now, politics play a central role in this book. In fact, communism gets mentioned a lot. Now, I won't dive into the politics in this book because there's so much going on, but keep in mind that they're there. And basically, Roma and Juliet start wondering if the communists are behind this monster, or if they created this monster specifically to drive them out of their own country. So with that in mind, let's dive into the book analysis. So overall, I really enjoyed the story, but there were a couple of things that I think the author could have done better. The first is that the story starts out a little bit slow-paced. Now, I'm not trying to say that the start of the story bored me. In fact, it was still very interesting, but since I'm analyzing it from the perspective of a writer, I think the start of the story could have been done way better. And the reason I say that is because the entire point of having this monster is to drive Roma and Juliet to work together. But they don't really work together until nearly halfway through the story. And that only happens when a specific character gets infected from this monster. That's when Roma and Juliet realize that they have to work together. So to me, this feels like the inciting incident of the book, and it takes place almost halfway through the story. Now, I think the author intended for the monster to be the inciting incident, and that takes place literally in the prologue, but to me that doesn't feel a strong enough inciting incident, because at that point the monster doesn't really mean much to the main characters. It's just a thing that they're terrified of, but it doesn't affect them on a personal level. No one they care about has been infected yet, so everything they do is merely out of caution and worry, but they're not being driven because of the monster affecting their own lives or their own family members or friends or even themselves. So even though there is the inciting incident of, oh no, there's a monster in Shanghai, it's not really an inciting incident because it doesn't matter as much to the main characters. And while we do have scenes where Roma and Juliet come face to face in the first half of the book, it's not as interesting as the second half of the book, when the actual, in my opinion, the actual inciting incident takes place. So to me, I feel like the first half of the book drags on when it could have been sped up and taken that inciting incident halfway through the story and put it earlier at the beginning of the story. That would have been more intriguing because it would have mattered more to the characters. Because again, we're not reading about the monster, we're reading about these characters and their fears. And their fears happen to be losing their loved ones. The monster is just a monster. It's out there. It doesn't really affect them on a deep level. But when that monster starts infecting people they care about, that's when it matters to them. And that's the inciting incident. But that's just me. I still enjoyed the first half of the book a lot, but I just think that could have been done better. Now, when Roma and Juliet finally decide to work together, the book gets so much better and everything just goes more fast-paced. There's a specific scene that, as I was reading, I thought the author could have done a little better as well. Now, it's still a fantastic scene, but again, from the perspective of a writer, me, I think this could have been more interesting. This scene is from Benedict's point of view, who is Roma's cousin or friend, one of the two. And it goes like this. This is a person. A voice in the deepest corners of Benedict's mind was hissing. You cannot abduct a person off the streets for experimentation. She was going to die anyway. Do you get to decide when? More people would die otherwise. You have killed too many people to claim you care about human life. So obviously the lines that are in italics are Benedict's thoughts and everything else is just the narrator. So this scene is basically Benedict having this internal conflict of trying to figure out if it's okay to kill this woman who's been infected by the monster. So she's going to die anyway because she's been infected, but he wants to figure out if it's okay to go ahead and kill her so that they can get answers. They want to dissect her to figure out what's going on. Why is this monster infecting? How is it infecting? In Benedict's mind, he's just trying to justify, like, is it okay to kill this woman? Or am I a criminal? And he's going back and forth in his own mind. So of course he tells himself, like, I killed so many people already because I'm a gangster. So what does it matter anyway? But usually the people they kill are gangsters, not average women off the road. So to him, this is like a whole new territory. And he's terrified. Is he about to kill an innocent? Now, I personally didn't think that the internal conflict in this scene was as strong as it could have been. It just didn't move me, even though I could see that the author was trying to make this an emotional scene. To me, it feels like Benedict is choosing whether to have an omelet or a fruit salad for breakfast. It just doesn't feel serious. So if I were to write the scene, I would do it in a different way. For example, I would show that Benedict is unsure. He would take the knife. He would look at the woman and he would be shaking his hand, unsure, can I kill her? I would describe how he is behaving, not just what he's thinking. I would show him hesitating to carve the woman, to dissect her. I would go about it in a whole different way. When we talk about show, don't tell, this is the exact scene where I think the show element was lacking. I think the author dove too much into Benedict's head and forgot that he has an external behavior that he's showing other characters. And that we also get to see. We get to see how he's behaving. But in this scene, we don't get any of that. We just get his thoughts. And that's not enough for me. I feel like I want to visualize his hesitation. I want to see that he's not sure what to do. Now, I know that not everybody stands there, shuffling between two decisions. Sometimes you just freeze and that's all there is just your thoughts and you're not actually behaving, you're just frozen. And that may have been the case, but I feel like having an action in the scene would have been more powerful than just freezing up, because most people, they don't just freeze up, they have a reaction. They frown, their hand shakes if they're holding a weapon. Maybe they say something that contradicts or shows what they're feeling. So that could have been done way better in this scene. Now, something I really like about this story is that it's written in third-person omniscient point of view. In other words, the narrator knows and sees everything. You could think of them as God of this world. They know what everyone's thinking and doing at all times. Now, for the most part, Gong sticks to Roma and Juliet's point of views in addition to some of their close friends' point of views. But every now and again, I would notice that Gong would switch from a main character's point of view to a side character's point of view. For example, there's one scene where we're at a research facility funded by Roma's people, his gang members, and there are two lines where we suddenly hop into the scientist's mind and see Juliet from his perspective. It's just two lines. We just hop into his mind, look at Juliet, and exit. At first, this threw me off so bad because, for one, I'm not used to reading third-person omniscient point of view. I was reading this on my Kindle, so I started scrolling back and forward trying to figure out when did we go into the scientist's point of view. We didn't start the scene with the scientist's point of view. So for a second, I thought that Gong just lost it and made a mistake and just inserted her narrative voice into this scientist's mind. And I'm like, oh my god, how could this author just randomly switch to a different point of view in the middle of a scene? But of course, 5 seconds later, I'm like, oh yeah, this is third-person omniscient point of view, where the narrator can do that because they're pretty much God. And I actually think that Gong did that really well. A big perk of this is that we get to learn what side characters think of the main characters without those side characters outright spelling out what they're thinking. What I mean is that it would be pretty weird for the scientist to just look at Juliet and tell her, here's what I think about you. That would be random, right? It's kind of like those cheesy books where the villain stops what they're doing in the middle of like a fight scene just to tell the hero why they're there to kill them. Like, once upon a time your mother betrayed me and now here I am doing this specifically to avenge my pride. That's weird. You don't want the character to just voice the thing that they're thinking. I mean, in certain incidents it works, but that's not the case for everything, especially when it's just a side character with a random thought. So this point of view allows us to hop in and out of characters' minds naturally. If we want their perspective on a specific character, they don't have to outright voice it. We just hop in their mind, hear what they have to say, and exit. It's great. Now, I will say, I don't personally enjoy writing in third-person point of view. And that's because I really love first-person point of view. But that doesn't mean that I don't enjoy reading other point of views in stories. But when it comes to my writing, I really prefer first-person point of view. But I'm curious, do you have a preference for point of views in your writing or in stories that you read? Let me know in the comments. Now, if you've been following my channel for a while, you know that I'm big on using the five senses and vivid details. And there's a specific scene I wanted to highlight because I think she does that so well here. 1 second, the woman on the table could have rivaled the dead. The next, she was writhing, her hand clutched to her chest and her legs rigidly straight. Her eyes remained closed. The only way they could tell when she died was when her hand fell from her chest and swung down from the table, waving back and forth like a heavy pendulum. I mean, how can you read these lines and not imagine exactly what's going on? There's a lot of showing details here. Gong does a great job of using show don't tell throughout the book, but this is very much heightened during this scene. She uses words like writhing, clutched, swung, and heavy pendulum. Not only are these words descriptive, they're specific. She doesn't just say the woman's hand fell from her body, because that would be boring. So what she does instead is paint the scene with words. And I absolutely love it. I'm a sucker for descriptive scenes because reading the scene, you know without doubt that the woman is dead. So it's detailed, it's emotional, and it really packs a punch. Now, there's a scene where Roma and Julia are walking in the research facility. Now, remember, they're still enemies, but they're temporarily working together to solve the issue of the monster. So Roma teasingly asks Julia if he should have blindfolded her before he led her to his secret research facility. So she doesn't take the information back to her gang. And Juliet responds that this information is pretty useless for her gang because her gang is pretty much in the Stone Age and they wouldn't even know how to advance to this level. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this scene is because I thought it was done beautifully, because we finally see that the two are becoming nice to each other. They're still not friends, but there's a little bit of civility. They're still teasing each other about blindfolding the other because they're still enemies, but you could see that they're kind of, letting the outside layers melt away and just get to know each other again and just become more friendly. Not friends, but friendly. And this also happens to be a little bit after the midpoint of the story. So notice that it takes them a while to become civil with one another. Now, I still think that this part of the story should have been moved earlier into the story, maybe a couple of chapters into the story, but that's just my opinion. I'm sure other readers have read this and thought, nope, it needed to happen in the midpoint of the story. But just putting that out there, I think it should have happened earlier. So Juliet pretty much just confessed to Roma that her gang isn't as advanced as his. So we had a tiny bit of civility and then this happens. Juliet says to Roma, "Now, are you going to report that information back?" And of course, Roma has to tease her back, so he says, "Why would I? We already knew that." So then these lines follow. Juliet stamped her foot down in a fit of feigned anger, but Roma was too quick. He moved his toes away, and all Juliet achieved was a shock rocketing up her ankle. So from there, we learned that this is a game they used to play as kids where if one of them stepped on the other's foot, the other has to return the gesture or else it could be bad luck for the two of them. And I love this scene so much because it really shows character development. We're about halfway through the book and so far they've gone from being enemies to enemies with a common goal to being civil. So there's definitely character growth there. They're not fully friends yet, but you could see how far they've come so far. At this point in the story, you could start seeing them remember their past. So little by little, we get to watch the ice between them melt. This is a great tactic whether you're writing an enemies to lovers story or just about any relationship. It's a great way to build tension and show us the characters getting closer. Think about it like this. As soon as they take 2 steps forward, they take a step back. And they keep doing that until they finally get together. In this case, Roma and Juliet have managed to get closer than before, but we could still see them tense. They're still unwilling to fully surrender to their feelings. And we could see this by the fact that they're literally asking each other, "Are you going to take this information back to your gang? Are you about to betray me?" There's this lack of trust even when they're smiling at each other, even when they're working together. So yeah, they now work together, but that doesn't mean there's full trust there. It's honestly a fantastic way to show character development and build tension and conflict. Now let's skip to a little bit later. Roma and Juliet are still at the research facility and they come across Roma's friends, Benedict and Marshall. Now, Marshall doesn't trust Juliet or her gang, which is fair considering their history. But even though Juliet is working with Roma and Roma tells Marshall to sit back down, Marshall still gets in Juliet's face. And we get this. Marshall grabbed her wrist. He pulled it out toward him, then reached for the hem of her sleeve, where he yanked at the blade she had hidden. "Why did you bring weapons, Miss Kai?" Now, there are 2 things you need to know about Marshall. The first is that he really loves his gang, and the second is that he's a ticking time bomb ready to explode. And this scene where he's all up in Juliet's face gives us a glimpse at how quick he is to blow. This is another great example of good character development. I won't mention what else happens in this scene due to spoilers, but the Marshall explosion doesn't end there. Hey guys, so I felt like doing a little fashion show, so I went and changed my clothes. Just kidding, it's just day 2 of filming. Okay, let's just get back to the story. So in the original Romeo and Juliet, the friar who marries Romeo and Juliet basically gives Juliet this potion that if she drinks it, she'll basically be in a death-like coma for a few hours. And he does this so that if she drinks this potion, everyone will think that Juliet is dead, but then her and Romeo can escape and, live happily ever after. Now, in Gong's retelling, there is no friar, but that's because Roma and Juliet basically don't get married in this book. There is another book after this one, so maybe they'll get married there. But in this book, so far, they haven't gotten married. So what Gong does is she replaces the friar with a scientist. And this scientist obviously has a lot of inventions. And can you guess what invention he's made? That's right. He basically makes this concoction that if you drink it, you'll basically look like you're dead for a few hours. So at one point, the scientist is showing the group his inventions. And this group includes Roma, Juliet, Marshall, and Benedict. So basically, Juliet gets to see this concoction that the scientist has made, and out of the whole group, she seems to like gravitate toward it the most, like just like, oh, this is an interesting concoction. And so she snatches it secretly without anyone noticing. Well, one person notices. Marshall. He sees her take it and hide it, but he doesn't say anything. So I just want to highlight this scene for a specific reason. The fact that this scene gives us a glimpse into the future. Now, what do I mean by this? So in writing, we have a concept known as Chekhov's gun. It's basically a rule that every element that's found in a story has to play a role, or else it's really pointless and shouldn't be there. So based on what we know from the original Romeo and Juliet play, and based on Chekhov's gun, we could fairly say that this concoction or this invention will be used at one point in this story. It might be used in this book, it might be used in the second one, but because Juliet took it, it will play a role and it will be used. Like, it has to. That's just part of the rule. Otherwise, the readers will be like, why did she take it? That's a plot hole. There's something missing here. You shouldn't even include it if it leads you nowhere. So just keep that in mind. And that's actually another reason why I wanted to highlight this scene, because I often find writers who forget that this is a rule. So they'll mention something and then it never comes up again, and it causes readers to stop and go, why was that there? What am I missing? And that can be very confusing, and it can make readers lose trust in the writer. So every detail in the story should matter, and if it's never brought up again, it shouldn't be there. You should just go back and remove it because it's just hurting your story. Also, utilizing Chekhov's gun is a great way to foreshadow, because you get to hint that something will happen without outright telling the reader that it's gonna happen. Readers are smart, so they'll pick up on this detail and start getting curious about how it's gonna be used without you having to tell them that it's going to be used. It's really a smart way to tell, or at least like hint at what's going to happen. Okay, so moving on from Chekhov's gun, there's a scene toward the end of the book where Roma and Julia are basically talking to this guy named Archibald, who might know more information about who the antagonist is. And he tells them that the antagonist uses a specific book. So of course, Juliet wants to take action, so she says that she has to get her hands on this book, because she thinks if she finally gets this book, maybe something in the book will reveal who the antagonist is. And this is what Archibald has to say about it. Oh, don't bother. He burned it. Once he had the methods memorized, do you really think he would risk people like you stealing it? I know mentioning this dialogue sounds a little random, but I have a reason for talking about it. And that's because this dialogue works so well. It basically tells us what the antagonist has been up to without having the antagonist hop into the scene and tell us himself. It's such a simple trick, but it works so well. I recently made a video on how to ensure your antagonist is not a flat character, which you could check out in the card here. And this was a tip I mentioned in the video. Basically, if an antagonist isn't present a lot in the book, you should still make their presence felt. And Gong does this through a side character telling us what the antagonist has been up to. Not to mention, this also helps the author avoid the antagonist coming into the scene and rambling on about all the things he's been up to. And I have seen some writers do this, which isn't good because it just comes off as cliche. Like, the antagonist comes on stage and he's just like, I'm doing this because in my past, my mother left me, my father was a criminal, and everybody betrayed me. So here's what I did for the past 5 months, and I did that because you remind me of my mother, etc, etc. And it's just like, why are we getting a speech from the antagonist? It just doesn't sound natural. It just ruins the scene. So this is a great way that Gong uses to basically go around that and not have the antagonist say it, but just have another character say it for him, and it works. It's genius. Now, when it comes to conflict, Gong has a lot of amazing scenes where she just builds on internal conflict. And here's an example. Roma's actions and Roma's words, utterly unable to put them up against each other, unable to comprehend why he would betray her when he said he loved her. Now she could not fathom him yet again, could not align the way he reached for her with the hate that he claimed to possess, could not understand the sadness in his eyes when he spoke of her being a new, cold Juliet he could not bear to see. I just love this scene. When I read it, it just like, I got goosebumps. There's so much emotion here. I love the scene. Something that makes the tension work so well here is the contradictions within the paragraph. First, we have this. He would betray her when he said he loved her. And then we have the way he reached for her with the hate that he claimed to possess. And finally, we have the sadness in his eyes. You could feel Juliet's confusion here because the paragraph in itself has so many conflicting sentences. Hands down, Gong does this so well. I mean, the conflict is just so beautifully written. Gong doesn't need to spell it out for us. She doesn't need to say that Juliet is confused or has no idea what to do. Instead, she just shows us the things that Juliet is conflicted with. So we just end up conflicted too. We feel like we're inside her head and we're just trying to figure out why Roma's actions and words don't line up. Is he good? Is he bad? Is he trying to betray us? Is he actually like in love with Julia? Like what's happening? You could see that in just the conflict in the sentences, you know, like he wants her, but he's pushing her. There's sadness in his eyes. There's just so much back and forth. This is just such a great way to create internal conflict. This is probably like my #1 scene in this entire book. I like stopped reading and I had to read the whole scene again because I really felt the emotion. I mean, I'm not usually like a reader that cries, but like this scene almost got me there. I like really felt the conflict. So really well done. And of course, this wouldn't be a Romeo and Juliet retelling if there wasn't a kiss scene. So the two finally kiss. But then Juliet panics and runs away. And honestly, I can't even blame her because of everything that happened so far. But then her inner demons keep eating at her, so she ends up going to Roma's territory so she could like talk to him. I guess she just wants to figure out like where they stand, get some closure, just figure out like you keep saying this but you act this way. Are we actually lovers? Are we friends? Are we enemies? What's happening? And when she does finally find him, Julia feels like she's going to erupt when she sees him. She feels overwhelmed by everything, and this is what goes on in her mind. Everything was tight. Her lungs, her skin, her teeth. She was too big for her body, bound to erupt into pieces and become a segment of the natural world growing in the cement cracks. The reason I wanted to highlight this is because I thought it was so interesting, just the fact that it took Roma and Juliet kissing to break down their barriers. Remember when I was talking about the two of them starting to become more civil? I mentioned how when you have love interests, you basically want them to take 2 steps forwards, 1 step back, and you just keep doing that until they finally get together. Well, they're not exactly together here, but I would say that the ice has thawed. Essentially, there are no more walls between them, and they can't take another step back. They're face to face and they have to deal with that. Up until this point, they were fighting how they felt and they didn't want to admit that there was something between the two of them. But obviously, once they kissed, they couldn't lie anymore. It was all out there. So now you have Juliet standing in front of Roma feeling like she's going to erupt because there's no more barrier between them. So the point of all this is that something really big always has to happen in order to let these characters finally succumb to their feelings. Like, they can't just randomly decide, yeah, we're right for each other. So something huge has to take place in order to get them there. And in this case, it was the kiss. Now, something else that Gong does so well is create tension in the reader. Because she uses third-person omniscient point of view, she can basically show us things that the main characters don't know about. For example, she shows us that someone spots Roma and Juliet together and plans to get them in trouble. But then in the next scene, Juliet basically thinks to herself that it's really nice that everyone is treating her as if she's invisible because that means they don't recognize her and Roma won't get in trouble. And this is obviously ironic because we, the readers, know that she's been spotted. We know that she's about to get in trouble. She doesn't know it, but we do. So there's so much tension here. It's like when you watch a horror movie and you know that the killer is coming for the main character and you want to tell them to watch out, but like there's nothing you could do. Now, when it comes to books, this can only be done in third person omniscient. Okay, so going off of point of view, in chapter 34, there's a verb tense shift. So at first I thought it had to be a mistake or some sort of error in publishing where they forgot to make it the right verb tense and so now it just reads weird. But then then as I continued reading through the chapter, I realized it was done on purpose. Basically, Gong switches from past tense to present tense. The reason she does this, at least from my interpretation, is to make it seem like the main characters and the whole city are being watched by this entity or this monster. It's not really, we don't really know who's watching them, but something is watching them, which I'm assuming is either the monster or maybe Shanghai itself as a spiritual essence. Here, take a look at this verb tense shift. They are criminals. Criminals at the top of an empire of thieves and drug lords and pimps, preparing to inherit a broken, terrible, defeated thing that looks upon them in sadness. The criminals here are obviously Roma, Juliet, and their friends. And I especially love the line, that looks upon them in sadness. Basically, the thing whose eyes we're currently watching them from is looking at them with sadness. And by this thing, I'm talking about maybe the monster or maybe the city itself. And they're about to inherit this thing, this monster or this sad city. It's just like a really nice statement. It makes it feel like they're being watched by something bigger than them, and this thing is aware, or it makes it seem like this thing is self-aware of how bad it's gotten. So overall, I really think there's something super interesting about this chapter, especially since it's the only chapter in the entire book that just breaks the whole verb tense. It just changes it completely. And I don't know, I really thought it was such a cool chapter. Now, because of spoilers, I won't mention the name of the antagonist, but basically when Roma and Juliet finally face off with the antagonist says, "You can't stop the monster, and you can't stop me." Now, I can't help but feel like this is weak character development. What I mean by that is that it feels like Gong made the antagonist a bit evil for the sake of being evil. Like, oh, you won't be able to stop me because I'm the antagonist. I don't know, it just comes off like they're trying to be scary or evil just because they're labeled the antagonist of the story. Now, I realize that the antagonist has their own reasons for doing what they do, but I just feel like this line makes them too self-aware that they're doing something evil, and they just don't care that they're causing harm. And they're just like, yeah, I'm evil, so what? To me, that just, I don't know, it's not really strong of a reason. I feel like there should be more to it. I mean, having the antagonist do bad things without it coming off as evil for the sake of being evil isn't necessarily the easiest thing to do. But just as with anything else in writing, if you're aware of your own weaknesses, you could work on them and improve them. That way you strengthen them so they're no longer weaknesses. Art form is going to be subjective, but the goal is to learn and improve and elevate your writing. So on that note, that's pretty much all I had for the book analysis. Obviously, you know, there's more to the story here, but I really enjoyed this story. I highly recommend it. There's a lot to learn from the way Chloe Gong writes. Her storytelling is beautiful. So if you're interested, definitely check out These Violent Delights, especially if you love Romeo and Juliet or any Shakespeare play. And I would love your opinion on what you thought of this book analysis video. Would you like to see more videos of this nature? Did you find the points that I made helpful? And what books would you like me to consider for future book analysis videos? Let me know in the comments. And if you're new to my channel, be sure to subscribe because I put out weekly writing advice videos that will take your story to the next level. Also, don't forget to follow me on social media to see what I'm up to from day to day and to chat with me. And before we go, I just want to give a quick shout out to Sarah Frayne, Alan J. Early, and Noah Quavanti from my shout out tier over on Patreon, as well as all my amazing patrons. Thank you all so much for your support. I really appreciate you. And remember, Nour for president!